Your TOEFL exam is only 2 weeks away, and you might be wondering if there's still enough time to improve your score. The answer is yes, but only if you use these final 14 days wisely. Most students panic, study randomly, and waste valuable time. Successful test takers focus on the right strategies, practice efficiently, and avoid common mistakes. In this episode, you'll get a complete last-minute TOEFL study plan that shows you exactly what to do each day to maximize your performance and walk into the exam with confidence.
And, that really is the foundational mission of our discussion today. We are taking a meticulously designed, comprehensive 14-day roadmap and, extracting the absolute best strategic maneuvers from it.
Right.
But to make this work, we need to establish a very clear boundary right at the top. We're not going to be teaching basic English today.
Yeah, that's crucial.
We aren't sitting here reviewing perfect verb conjugations, and we aren't discussing the fundamental rules of syntax or, how to use a comma.
Which would be a totally different deep dive, honestly.
Exactly. Specifically. Yeah. Today is entirely, unequivocally about test performance and cognitive strategy. We are looking at how you can take the language skills you already possess right this second and optimize them for this highly specific, highly timed, high-pressure environment.
So what if I told you that taking a practice test every single day for the next 2 weeks is actually the fastest way to completely ruin your score?
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds counterintuitive, right? I mean, we're conditioned to believe that more practice equals better results, but when you only have 14 days left, the rules of the game fundamentally change.
They really do.
If you are listening to this, you are in that 2-week window. You are likely feeling this, massive mountain of pressure, a ticking clock echoing in the back of your mind, and honestly, a profound sense of anxiety.
Yeah, the anxiety is completely valid.
Right. And the natural human instinct is to try and cram 5 years of organic language learning into a fortnight. But doing the wrong things right now isn't just unhelpful, it is actively destructive.
The psychology of how humans operate under an impending deadline it's fascinating and often quite self-sabotaging.
Oh, totally.
When that test date suddenly looms on the horizon, we tend to abandon our strategic mindset. We resort to panic-driven, frantic action because doing something, anything at all, temporarily soothes the anxiety.
It feels like progress, even if it's not.
Right. Which brings us to the ultimate reality check for anyone in this situation. You cannot overhaul deep, intuitive grammar or fundamentally expand your baseline reading comprehension in 14 days.
That's just a biological fact.
It is. Those underlying linguistic foundations take months, if not years, to build and solidify. However, what you absolutely can master in a 2-week sprint are the formats, the structural templates for speaking, the meticulous management of your time, and the active note-taking strategies.
I really want to lean into an analogy here because I think it perfectly frames our goal. Think about a world-class musician, say, a professional violinist preparing for a major career-defining concert.
Okay, I like this.
That violinist does not decide to learn a completely new, incredibly complex symphony the week before they go on stage.
No, of course not.
Attempting that would guarantee a disaster. Instead, what do they do during that final week? They obsessively perfect the pieces they already know.
They refine the technique.
Exactly. They focus on their timing, their tuning, their transitions, their physical stamina, and their stage presence. For you, the listener, the goal for the next 2 weeks isn't achieving a state of absolute flawless English perfection.
Because that's impossible.
Right. The goal is performance optimization. It's ensuring that when you sit down at that computer, the examiner sees the absolute best, most polished version of the English you already have.
That is a brilliant framework. You're essentially stepping onto a stage, and the examiner is your audience.
Yeah.
And just as a musician can completely sabotage their performance with chaotic, poorly structured rehearsal habits in the final days, test takers routinely sabotage their scores by falling into specific traps.
These are the fatal mistakes.
Right. In our research, these are identified as actions that drain your limited time, spike your cortisol levels, and offer absolutely zero return on your energetic investment. We need to clear these bad habits away before we even touch the daily schedule.
So I want to dive straight into the first mistake because it directly challenges the most common advice given to students. Mistake number 1, taking too many practice tests without conducting a deep, analytical review.
This is huge.
I know students who proudly declare they are taking a full 3-hour test every single morning. Isn't more exposure always better? Why is taking a test every single day a recipe for failure?
To understand why that fails, we have to look at the cognitive science of learning. A practice test, in and of itself does not teach you anything new.
It doesn't.
No, it is merely a measurement tool. Think of it as a thermometer. If you have a severe fever, taking your temperature 6 times a day does not cure the infection.
Oh, wow. That makes sense.
Right. It simply confirms over and over again that you are sick. When you take a grueling 3-hour test and immediately jump into another one the next day without meticulously reviewing your errors, you are quite literally cemented your bad habits into your neural pathways.
So you're just getting better at failing.
Accurately put, you are training your brain to repeat the exact same incorrect logical leaps, the same timing errors, and the same misunderstandings of question structures.
So you're basically just getting highly efficient at making the same mistakes. You're automating your errors.
That is the perfect way to phrase it. The cognitive science behind skill acquisition requires a closed feedback loop. You perform an action, you assess the outcome of that action, you adjust your internal model based on the failure, and then you perform again.
And doing test after test breaks that loop.
It completely shatters it. It's all output with no diagnostic input. A good rule of thumb is that you should spend at least as much time reviewing a practice test as you did taking it.
Wait, really? The same amount of time?
Yes. If you spend 3 hours testing, you need 3 hours of surgical review.
That makes total sense, but it's definitely not what people want to hear because reviewing mistakes is painful. It hurts the ego. And that leads right into the second trap. I can picture this scenario vividly. A student is lying in bed, swiping through a flashcard app on their phone, blindly memorizing 50 obscure, highly complex words a day.
We've all been there.
Right. They feel incredibly productive. They're getting that little dopamine hit every time they swipe right. But then exam day arrives. They encounter one of those words in a dense reading passage, and their mind goes entirely blank.
Well, they misuse it.
Exactly. They try to force that word into their writing, and it sounds completely absurd and unnatural. Why does that isolated vocabulary study fail so spectacularly?
It fails because language is not a static dictionary. It is a living, breathing ecosystem. Words constantly shift and change meaning based on the neighbors surrounding them.
Context matters.
Completely. Let's look at a classic example. If you memorize the word compromise purely as reaching a mutual agreement, you feel confident.
That's a definition, sure.
But then, on the test, you get a biology reading passage discussing a patient whose immune system has been compromised.
Oh, no.
If you only have the isolated definition, your brain crashes trying to figure out why an immune system is signing a peace treaty.
That's a great example.
Rote memorization of isolated words builds an incredibly fragile memory structure. To genuinely retain and deploy a word, your brain requires semantic networks.
Semantic networks.
Yes, it needs to see how the word functions within the architecture of a sentence, how it interacts with prepositions, and how it contributes to the overarching argument of a paragraph.
I love that phrase, semantic networks. It's like trying to learn how a steering wheel works without ever seeing a car.
Exactly.
Which brings us to a mistake that I think is deeply rooted in human ego. It's the tendency to ignore our weak sections because practicing our strengths is just vastly more enjoyable.
Oh, human nature at its finest.
Right. I mean, it feels fantastic to get a high score. If my reading comprehension is already phenomenal, I naturally want to keep doing reading practice because it strokes my ego and validates my intelligence. Meanwhile, my speaking score might be dragging my entire average into the mud, but I avoid it because it makes me feel incompetent. Why do our brains naturally want to hide from our weak spots during test prep?
It comes down to the biology of discomfort. It is psychologically agonizing to constantly confront our own incompetence, especially under the shadow of a high-stakes deadline.
It's exhausting.
Very. Our brains seek the path of least cognitive resistance and the highest emotional reward. Doing what we are already good at provides that reward. However, if we look at the pure mathematics of the scoring system, this behavior is irrational.
How so?
The concept of diminishing returns applies heavily here. It requires an astronomical amount of effort and sheer luck to raise a reading score from a 28 to a perfect 30.
Because you're already at the top.
Right. You are fighting for mere percentage points. Conversely, it is mathematically much easier to raise a disastrous speaking score from a 15 to a 22.
Wow, that's a 7-point jump.
And that is a massive aggregate jump that can absolutely be achieved in 14 days simply by applying structural templates. Your lowest scoring section is the most fertile, responsive ground for rapid point accumulation.
So we have to swallow our pride and run toward the fire.
Yes,
And while we're analyzing our mistakes in those weak areas, we have to avoid the next trap failing to analyze the why behind the error. This connects back to our thermometer analogy. If you get a reading question wrong, you can't just glance at the answer key, sigh, say, oh, it was C, not B, and move on to the next passage.
Right. Meticulously dissecting the root cause, the fundamental why, is the entire secret to effective test preparation.
You have to be a detective.
You really do. When you miss a question, you have to adopt the mindset of a forensic detective. Did you genuinely misunderstand a crucial vocabulary word in the third paragraph?
Or maybe you just ran out of time.
Exactly. Did you mismanage your time, panic with 1 minute left, and just guess randomly? Or did you misread the question prompt itself, perhaps overlooking a critical modifier like the word not or exceptee?
Those are tricky.
If you don't know why you missed it, you cannot implement a safeguard to prevent it from happening again. Every single mistake you make in practice is a highly valuable piece of diagnostic data pointing you directly toward your next focused study session.
That reframes failure completely. A mistake isn't a judgment on your English, it's a diagnostic signpost.
Perfectly said.
Now, the next mistake is one that I think university students everywhere, across all disciplines, are universally guilty of. I'm talking about poor sleep habits, and specifically the glorified all-nighter.
The enemy of learning.
We have this cultural narrative that if we stay up until 4 a.m., huddled over our textbooks, drinking terrible coffee, we are being incredibly dedicated. But the research shows we are actually doing active, measurable damage to our brains.
The neuroscience on this is absolute and undeniable. Sleep is not a luxury you can afford to sacrifice for extra study time.
It's mandatory.
It is a biological mandate for memory consolidation. Let me explain the mechanics of this. During your waking hours, as you study grammar and read passages, your brain takes in that new information, but it stores it only temporarily in the hippocampus.
Okay, the hippocampus.
Think of the hippocampus as a small USB flash drive. It fills up quickly, it is highly volatile. It is only when you go to sleep, specifically when you cycle into deep, slow-wave sleep and REM sleep, that your brain physically replays those daily experiences and transfers that data from the hippocampus to the neocortex.
And the neocortex is the permanent storage.
Exactly. The neocortex is the permanent hard drive. If you pull an all-nighter, you are essentially ripping the USB drive out of the computer before the file transfer is complete.
Oh man, that is a brutal image.
You are hitting the delete button on a massive portion of the knowledge you just spent 8 hours trying to acquire.
That is terrifying, but incredibly illuminating. So all that vocabulary, all those templates you tortured yourself to memorize at 3 a.m. are just evaporating because you didn't allow the biological save process to run.
It's tragically inefficient.
Which naturally transitions into the final agonizing mistake on our list, last-minute cramming on the actual morning of the exam. I've seen this. People sitting in the parking lot of the test center, steering wheel in one hand, frantically scrolling through a PDF of speaking templates on their phone, trying to shove 10 more words into their brain 5 minutes before walking through the doors.
That behavior is driven by pure adrenaline, and it actively destroys your ability to perform.
How does it destroy it?
The exam we are discussing is a grueling cognitive marathon. It requires immense, sustained working memory and high-level executive function. When you cram frantically right before walking into the testing room, you trigger an acute stress response. Your adrenal glands flood your system with cortisol.
The stress hormone.
Yes. While cortisol is great if you need to run from a predator, it actively suppresses your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logical reasoning and memory retrieval.
Wait, it suppresses the part of the brain you need for the test.
Absolutely. By cramming, you are chemically blocking your brain's ability to access the very information you've spent the last 2 weeks meticulously organizing. The morning of the test must be dedicated to calm, confident retrieval, not frantic, fear-based input.
Okay, let's summarize the slate we've just wiped clean. We are banning mindless, repetitive test-taking without review.
Agreed.
We are tossing out the isolated flashcards devoid of context. We are refusing to hide from our weakest subjects. We are committing to forensically investigating the why of every single error. We are protecting our sleep cycles, like our lives depend on it, and we are absolutely forbidding any parking lot cramming. Now that the destructive habits are out of the way, how do we systematically deploy the 3 to 4 hours of daily study time we have? Let's break down the first half of the 14-day roadmap. This initial week is what we'll call the calibration and automation phase.
This first week is where we build the structural integrity of your approach. And it kicks off with day 1, which is entirely about diagnosis.
Okay, day 1.
On this very first day, your sole task is to sit down and take a full, brutally timed practice test. And here is the element that makes students uncomfortable. You do absolutely no other studying on day one.
What? None.
None. You don't review grammar rules, you don't look up new words, you don't practice templates, you just take the exam, simulate the exhaustion of the real environment, and acquire your baseline measurement.
I have to push back on this because the psychological friction here is huge. On day one, with the clock ticking down from 14, we do zero studying. Just a test and review. That feels, frankly, like wasting a profoundly precious day. The anxiety is screaming that we need to be learning, and instead, we're just taking a test and going to sleep.
I completely validate that anxiety. It feels counterproductive. But think of it as a mandatory calibration phase. You wouldn't attempt to navigate a cross-country road trip without first turning on your GPS to determine your exact starting coordinates.
Okay, fair point.
Day one is purely about generating empirical data. Yes, it is psychologically painful to confront a baseline score that might be significantly lower than the university requirement you are aiming for. However, without that specific data, the next 13 days of study are essentially blind guessing.
Because you don't know what to fix.
Exactly. You take the test, you deeply, exhaustively review the errors as we discussed, and you objectively identify your weakest section. That data point dictates your triage strategy moving forward.
That makes perfect sense. It's the bitter pill you have to swallow to ensure you're taking the right medicine. You need the diagnostic before the prescription. So moving into day two, we shift to format mastery. This is where we dissect the anatomy of the test.
Yes, right, cut it down.
We learn every single reading question type. We hit record on our phones and do a task 1 speaking response just to hear where we currently stand. And we begin learning contextual vocabulary.
What is truly advantageous about this specific exam is that it is rigidly standardized.
Meaning it doesn't change much.
Right. The test makers are not reinventing the wheel every weekend. The question types in the reading section, whether it's a main idea question, an inference question, a vocabulary and context question, or an insert text question, they follow strict, highly predictable architectural patterns.
So it's basically a formula.
Day two is about lifting the hood and seeing how the engine works. Once you understand the mechanical anatomy of the test, it stops feeling like an unpredictable, malicious monster. You begin to see the matrix, so to speak. You know what the test makers are specifically asking you to execute.
That realization alone lowers the anxiety. Now, days 3 and 4 are where we really get into the weeds of the inputs. Day 3 is the listening deep dive, which introduces the mechanics of active note-taking.
Crucial skill.
And day 4 shifts to reading speed, specifically training the brain to map a text rather than read it like a novel. I know we are going to dive incredibly deep into the specific step-by-step mechanics of both note-taking and skimming in just a few minutes. But what is the overarching philosophical shift happening in the brain on days 3 and 4?
The overarching shift is transitioning the student from a passive consumer of information to an active extractor of architecture.
Extractor of architecture, I like that.
For reading, speed is the ultimate barrier. Many students read English beautifully, but they read it far too slowly for a timed environment. Day 4 is fundamentally about training your visual and cognitive systems to absorb the structural skeleton of an academic text before getting bogged down in the microscopic details.
So you're finding the bones of the essay.
Yes. If you understand the blueprint of an argument, locating the specific piece of evidence a question is asking about becomes exponentially faster.
And then we hit day 5, which is the speaking focus, and day 6, the writing deep dive. This is where the output gets automated. I want to spend a moment on the psychological experience of day 5.
It's a tough way for many.
Imagine you are a student sitting alone in your room. You read a speaking prompt, you hit record on your phone's voice memo app, and you try to answer. You stop the recording and listen back. For almost everyone, this first playback is excruciating.
It's a rude awakening.
You hear yourself saying, for 3 seconds straight. You hear yourself pausing awkwardly while searching for a word. You hear your train of thought completely derail. It's devastating. But then you introduce a structural template. You try again. And suddenly, as if by magic, those awkward gaps vanish. What is physically happening in the brain when a template is applied?
What you are experiencing is the sudden, dramatic reduction of cognitive load.
Cognitive load.
Human working memory has severe limitations. When you attempt to speak spontaneously in a second language under time pressure, your brain is fighting a war on 2 fronts.
Yeah.
It is spending about 80% of its available energy trying to figure out how to construct the sentence, the grammar, the syntax, the transition words.
Right.
That leaves only 20% of your mental bandwidth to actually search for the right vocabulary and formulate the argument. The what?
No wonder people freeze.
By memorizing and relentlessly practicing a structural template, you completely automate the how. The transition voices become muscle memory. This frees up nearly 100% of your cognitive processing power to focus entirely on the what.
That is a massive paradigm shift. You aren't cheating the test, you are intelligently managing your brain's processing power. You're installing an operating system so the apps can run faster.
That's a great way to put it.
Following that logic, Day 6 applies the same automation to the writing section. We structure the integrated task, which is a demanding 20-minute synthesis, and the academic discussion task, which is a rapid-fire 10-minute opinion piece. And finally, we arrive at Day 7, the midpoint check. This is where we take our second full timed practice test.
Day 7 is the pivot point of the entire strategy. It marks the end of the calibration and automation phase. You take the results of this second test and place them directly beside your Day 1 diagnostic.
Comparing the data.
Exactly. This is where you look for objective evidence of adaptation. Have your reading scores stabilized because you now recognize the question types? Is your speaking fluency tangibly smoother because the templates are holding your ideas together?
You have to celebrate those wins.
You acknowledge and celebrate those structural wins, but more importantly, you identify the stubborn, resistant weaknesses that haven't budged an inch. Because as we move into the second week, the strategy fundamentally transforms.
Right. Week 1 is about building the foundation, acquiring the tools, and gathering the data. Week 2 is where we take that data and ruthlessly, almost surgically, target the remaining weak spots. We are shifting gears from foundational learning to high-intensity refinement. So let's look at the Week 2 phase, which we can call the endurance and simulation phase.
Days 8 and 9 are purely about microscopic refinement. For the listening section, this means fine-tuning your accuracy.
Like finding out why you missed specific details.
Yes, when you miss a detailed question, you go back to the audio and figure out exactly why. Did the professor use a transition word indicating a shift in perspective that you missed? For reading, it is about maximizing surgical efficiency.
Such as?
For instance, realizing that for vocabulary and context questions, the answer must always be supported by evidence within that specific sentence, or the one immediately preceding it. You stop looking at the whole paragraph and start analyzing the localized syntax.
Then days 10 and 11 significantly turn up the heat. This is pure simulation. We are talking about doing back-to-back speaking tasks, intentionally mimicking the cognitive exhaustion of the real exam. We are talking about polishing writing under incredibly strict, unforgiving conditions, relentlessly counting your words, meticulously double-checking subject-verb agreements, while a timer literally counts down in your peripheral vision.
This shift is entirely about building mental stamina. As we've noted, this exam is a grueling, multi-hour cognitive marathon.
It's exhausting.
It truly does not matter how eloquent and beautiful your writing is during a relaxed practice session on day 1 if your brain is completely depleted of glucose and willpower by the time you reach the final writing section on exam day. Days 10 and 11 are designed to train your endurance so that your intellectual performance doesn't crash at the finish line.
And that brutal training leads to day 12, the final test. The third and final full simulation. You put your phone in another room, you don't pause the timer to go to the kitchen to get a snack, you don't listen to music. You simulate the sterile, unforgiving environment of the test center as closely as possible. And then we arrive at day 13, targeted drilling. Now, the strategy here is incredibly specific and a little controversial. It mandates that you spend 60% of your study time on your lowest scoring section, and it strictly forbids attempting to learn any new concepts.
Yes. 60% rule.
I have to ask about this. Wouldn't it be safer and frankly more confidence building to guarantee a perfect score on our best section instead of struggling and getting frustrated with our worst one the day before we rest?
It's a very common assumption driven by a desire for psychological safety, but mathematically it is fundamentally flawed.
Okay, let's hear the math.
The scoring system of this exam does not reward a severely lopsided performance. Let's look at the numbers again. If your reading score is a 27 out of 30, pushing it to a 29 might take 40 hours of intense, high-level vocabulary acquisition and complex syntax mapping. The effort-to-point ratio is terrible.
Because it's so hard to get those last few points.
But if your speaking score is a 16 because you constantly pause, moving it to a 22 or a massive 6-point aggregate jump might only require 4 hours of relentless template drilling.
Wow, okay.
You must triage your efforts. You deploy your limited time where the potential point gains are the largest. And regarding the ban on new concepts by day 13, the concrete is setting.
No new information?
None. Introducing a complex new grammar rule or a confusing list of words will only create cognitive interference, disrupting the solid patterns you've built over the last 12 days. Your brain desperately needs time to solidify what it already knows.
Which brings us to day 14, the day before. The instructions here are almost comically specific, but I know they are crucial. The mandate is rest. A maximum of 1.5 hours of very light, gentle review. Prepare your documents, set out your identification, pack your designated snacks, lay out your clothes, set 2 independent alarms, and be physically in bed with the lights out by 10 p.m. It sounds a bit obsessive, focusing on where your socks are instead of studying.
It may sound obsessive, but what we're systematically doing here is eliminating decision fatigue.
Decision fatigue.
Willpower and cognitive processing power are finite daily resources. On the morning of a high-stakes, structurally complex exam, you should absolutely not be spending mental energy frantically looking for your passport, debating what shirt to wear, or standing in front of the fridge wondering what to eat for breakfast.
Because that burns energy.
Every single trivial choice you make depletes your cognitive reserves. By preparing the entire physical environment the night before, you preserve 100% of your brain power for the exam itself. You wake up, and you simply execute the program.
Okay, so we have the entire 14-day schedule mapped out. We understand the physiological rhythm and the psychological phases of the next 2 weeks. Now, we need to crack open the specific granular techniques required to survive the individual sections. Let's start with the inputs listening and reading, because before you can formulate a brilliant essay, you have to successfully absorb and categorize the information hitting you.
The absolute key to mastering the inputs is making a definitive shift from passive reception to active extraction.
Let's break that down.
Let's begin by deconstructing listening. Passive listening is what you do when you put on an English podcast while you wash the dishes or ride the bus. You comprehend the general idea, but the details wash over you.
Right.
Active listening, which is required here, means you are sitting up, your pen is poised, you are actively predicting the speaker's next logical point, and you are identifying the structural architecture of the lecture as it happens in real time.
And the primary physical tool for active listening is note-taking. But the strategy dictates very strict rules for this. You use abbreviations, you draw physical arrows to show relationships like cause and effect, and most importantly, you absolutely do not try to write down every single word the professor says. Why is transcribing so dangerous?
If we connect this back to how human memory and auditory processing work, attempting to transcribe a lecture word for word is a fatal error.
Really?
Yes. When you focus entirely on transcription, you completely bypass the higher-order comprehension centers of your brain. You essentially become a human typewriter recording phonetic sounds without processing their semantic meaning.
You're just taking dictation.
Furthermore, people speak at roughly 150 words per minute, but you can only physically write about 30 words per minute. You will lose the race every single time.
So what's the alternative?
Structural note-taking forces you to synthesize. You listen to a block of speech, you understand the core concept, you mentally condense it, and then you write down a symbol or an abbreviated word that represents that entire concept.
Let's bring this to life. I want to use the jazz history example from our research because it perfectly illustrates the difference between a failing strategy and a winning strategy. Imagine you are sitting in the exam. You are listening to a professor give a dense, fast-paced lecture on how jazz music developed in America.
A very common topic.
Right. So a panicked, weak note-taker hears the audio and frantically tries to write, "Jazz started in African-American communities in New Orleans, and then it moved to Chicago and New York." By the time they finish physically writing the word York, the professor is already 3 sentences ahead, discussing the economic impact of the radio, and the student is completely, hopelessly lost.
That is exactly how the spiral of panic begins. Now let's contrast that with a highly trained, strong note-taker. They hear the exact same introductory sentence. They process the core conceptual elements, the subject, the origin, and the movement.
So they don't write it all out.
They don't write sentences. They simply write the word jazz. They draw an arrow pointing to origins NO for New Orleans. They draw a second arrow pointing to spread Chile/NYC, and perhaps a final arrow pointing to global.
That is so much faster.
In 5 seconds, they have captured the entire historical timeline and the geographic cause and effect relationship, and their pen is ready and waiting for the professor's next major point. They haven't missed a single beat.
That is the profound difference between frantically capturing the words and calmly capturing the structure. And capturing the structure helps you avoid the incredibly common traps the test makers set, like distractors.
Oh, distractors are brutal.
Distractors are answer choices that use the exact vocabulary words from the audio, making them look incredibly tempting, but they completely twist the logical meaning. Or missing the professor's tone. If a professor suddenly uses hedging language words like, I suppose, perhaps, or it's theoretically possible, they are specifically signaling uncertainty. And that uncertainty frequently shows up in the questions asking about the speaker's attitude.
Spot on. And that exact same principle of active structural extraction applies directly to the reading section. The time constraint here is brutal. You have a maximum of 17 to 18 minutes per passage.
That goes by so fast.
Within that incredibly tight window, you must read a dense 700-word academic text, often about a topic you know nothing about, like Mesopotamian agriculture or the cellular structure of algae, and answer 10 complex questions.
So the core survival strategy here is skimming. The roadmap advises reading the first paragraph fully, then reading only the first sentences of the subsequent body paragraphs, and then reading the final paragraph. But I have to push back here. Skimming sounds an awful lot like guessing.
I hear this all the time.
If I only read the first sentence of a massive, dense paragraph, how do I skim without missing the crucial, microscopic details they're inevitably going to test me on? Aren't I just closing my eyes and hoping for the best?
This is a brilliant and necessary pushback, because it articulates a fear every single student harbors. In this specific academic context, skimming is not guessing, it is mapping.
Mapping.
Academic English writing is highly standardized and formulaic. The first sentence of a body paragraph is almost universally the topic sentence. It explicitly states the main claim or the central argument of that entire paragraph.
So it tells you exactly what's coming.
Yes. The remaining 6 or 7 sentences of that paragraph are simply evidence, specific examples, and elaboration designed to support that initial claim. By reading only the first sentences, you are actively building a mental table of contents. You are constructing a map of the text's architecture.
Okay, let's walk through how that actually works during the test. So I've mapped the text. I know paragraph 2 is about the causes of an event, and paragraph 3 is about the results. Then I get a detailed question asking about a very specific date or a specific chemical reaction. Because I only skimmed, I didn't actually read that chemical reaction. But I don't panic, because I check my mental map. I say to myself, the chemical reactions were the results of the experiment, which were exclusively discussed in paragraph 3. So I bypass the rest of the text, I scan directly to paragraph 3, look for the keyword representing the chemical, and find the answer.
Exactly the right approach. You are treating the academic text as a reference database rather than a work of literature that you must deeply comprehend and memorize.
That saves so much time.
This technique prevents you from falling into the most devastating time trap on the exam. Reading a dense, highly technical scientific explanation over and over again simply because you don't understand it. Students will burn 5 precious minutes trying to comprehend the mechanics of cellular mitosis, only to realize later that there isn't even a single question asking about that specific sentence. Mapping prevents you from reading what you don't need to read.
And for main idea questions, our roadmap issues a massive warning. The correct answer must cover the entire passage. A classic trap is an answer choice that is completely factually true based on a careful reading of paragraph 2, but it totally ignores the arguments made in paragraphs 3, 4, and 5. It's a true detail, but it is a false main idea.
That distinction is vital for high scores. The test makers are explicitly assessing your ability to separate the forest from the trees. If you have successfully mapped the passage through structural skimming, you will possess a macro-level understanding of the text. You will look at that tempting answer choice and recognize it for what it is, a highly specific, localized detail masquerading as the central thesis.
Okay, so we've conquered the inputs. We know how to map a dense reading passage, and we know how to structurally note-take a fast-paced lecture without turning into a human typewriter. Now we have to turn around and output that synthesized information under immense, unforgiving time pressure. Let's transition to mastering the output speaking and writing.
This is where rigorous preparation meets live execution. Let's start by breaking down speaking. You face 4 tasks. 1 is independent, where you must quickly defend a personal opinion on a familiar topic.
Like giving your opinion on an issue.
Exactly. The other 3 are integrated, meaning you must synthesize reading and listening materials and orally explain how they interact. The raters evaluating your responses are looking at 3 specific metrics: your delivery, your language use, and your topic development.
But the crucial point we need to emphasize here is what they are absolutely not evaluating. They are not looking for a flawless natal-sounding accent.
That is a huge misconception.
They want linguistic fluency, clear, deliberate pacing, and a solid, logical structure. So what does this reality mean for someone whose accent is heavily influenced by their native language, whether that's Mandarin, Arabic, Spanish, or French? Should they spend their precious 2 weeks trying to sound like an American television news anchor?
Emphatically no. Attempting to artificially mask your natural accent during a high-stress, timed, cognitive exam is a recipe for absolute disaster.
Because it's too much work.
Doing so massively increases your cognitive load. Your brain is suddenly diverting energy to the physical positioning of your tongue and lips, which inevitably results in unnatural pacing, broken syntax, and severe hesitation.
That makes total sense.
The human raters are specifically trained to listen past accents. What they actively penalize is unintelligibility mumbling into the microphone, rushing so fast that the syllables blur into a single sound, or pausing in total silence for 5 seconds in the middle of a thought because you lost your place. Fluency is fundamentally about the smooth, logical, uninterrupted flow of ideas, not the geographic origin of your vowels.
And as we discussed earlier, the ultimate secret weapon for achieving that smooth, uninterrupted flow is the template. I want to look closely at the city versus countryside example from our study plan because it highlights exactly how a template functions in reality. The prompt asks a classic independent question. Some people prefer to live in a city, others prefer the countryside. Which do you prefer and why?
Let's deconstruct what a high-scoring model response looks like. It begins directly and forcefully. I strongly prefer living in a city for 2 main reasons.
Bam, right to the point.
Notice, there is no hesitation, no philosophical rambling about the nature of modern society. It immediately establishes the position. Then it moves to the first point. First, cities offer far more career and educational opportunities. That is a clear, undeniable topic sentence.
But here's where the real magic happens. The response doesn't stop at the general statement. It moves to the specific. For example, I was able to find an internship at a major technology company after moving to Seoul, which would not have been possible in my small hometown. This is infinitely better than just repeating cities have more jobs. It's highly specific, it's personal, and it proves to the rater that you can use the English language to narrate a coherent mini-story.
The specificity is precisely what elevates the score from average to exceptional. And then the structural template drives the argument home. Second, cities provide unparalleled access to cultural events. This is why, despite the noise and the crowds, I would always choose city life.
That's incredibly solid.
The template forces the speaker to deploy crucial transition words. First, for example. Second, this is why. It essentially creates a sturdy linguistic skeleton that the rater can effortlessly follow, even if your pronunciation isn't perfect or if you stumble over one specific vocabulary word. The logic remains intact.
Writing operates on the exact same principle of structural automation. We have 2 tasks to conquer. First, the integrated task, where you have 20 minutes to summarize a lecture that usually directly challenges or contradicts a reading passage. Second, the academic discussion task, a modern edition where you have a mere 10 minutes to state a clear position on a topic and provide a real-world example.
The integrated writing task is fundamentally a test of comparison and contrast. It is crucial to remember that you are not giving your personal opinion on the subject matter. You are acting strictly as an objective reporter.
Right, you're just reporting what was said.
The required structure is rigid, but highly effective. The reading claims X, but the lecture actively challenges this claim by stating why. You must repeat this structural contrast for all 3 points of contention presented in the materials. The primary grammar traps to watch out for here, especially when the adrenaline is pumping and the clock is flashing red, are simple errors like subject-verb agreement writing the research show instead of the research shows, and run-on sentences where your panic causes you to completely forget basic punctuation.
Templates are the skeleton of your output, but vocabulary is the muscle that actually moves that skeleton. Let's look at the specific words that will elevate these responses from average to elite, and let's also discuss how to analyze our practice tests to ensure we are actually making progress. We are moving into the connective tissue of the strategy-targeted vocabulary and test review.
We established early on that memorizing random dictionary words in a vacuum is a colossal waste of time. Instead, the strategy highlights a very specific, highly curated type of vocabulary, high-frequency academic verbs and adjectives. We are looking at words like facilitate, subsequent, implicit, prevalent, Attribute, scrutinize elaborate and phenomenon.
Now, I noticed the plan recommends learning about 10 of these words a day. Out of all the hundreds of thousands of words in the English language, why are words like undermine, refute, or contradict prioritized so heavily for this specific test? Why these verbs?
Because the test is, at its core, an exam about academic argumentation. It tests your ability to understand how complex ideas interact with one another. In a university setting, professors don't just passively say things.
They are
Exactly. They argue a point, they refute a counter-argument, they propose a new hypothesis, and they undermine previous outdated theories. If you don't deeply understand the word undermine, and the listening passage features a professor methodically dismantling a theory presented in the reading passage, you will lack the linguistic tools necessary to accurately describe the hostile relationship between the two texts.
Let's create a mini scenario to really illustrate this difference. Imagine a student is writing their integrated essay. A weak, low-scoring response might read, "The reading says the new economic policy is good, but the professor says the reading is bad and wrong." It's technically conveying the truth of the prompt, but it sounds like a middle school book report. It lacks academic weight.
Exactly. Now consider a student who has mastered this targeted academic vocabulary. They write, "The reading asserts that the new economic policy will actively facilitate growth." However, the professor's lecture severely undermines this claim by highlighting the subsequent environmental damages.
Boom. That is a definitively high-scoring sentence. You've naturally deployed asserts, facilitate, undermines, and subsequent perfectly in context. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt to the reader that you possess the sophisticated tools of academic discourse.
And moving beyond the verbs themselves, we must address transition words. Think of words like furthermore, nevertheless, and consequently as the traffic signals of your essay.
Traffic signals, I like that.
These words explicitly tell the human grader how to read your mind. They signal whether you are adding supporting information, introducing a sharp contrast, or concluding a complex line of thought. Without them, your essay is just a pile of disconnected sentences.
But learning these sophisticated words and transition signals is only half the battle. The other half is the test review strategy. We talk at the very beginning about how taking tests without reviewing them is a fatal mistake that cements bad habits. So how do we actually review? What does that process look like?
It requires an uncomfortable level of rigorous honesty. For the reading section, you must categorize every single error. Did you get the question wrong because you genuinely didn't know a crucial vocabulary word? Or did you run out of time and simply guess? Or did you fall for a cleverly disguised distractor?
You really have to dig in.
For the listening section, reviewing means you must replay the actual audio file while simultaneously looking at your handwritten notes. Where exactly did the disconnect occur? Did the professor verbally signal a change in topic with a word like however, and you completely missed the cue, failing to draw an arrow in your notes?
And for the speaking section, reviewing means you have to be brave enough to listen to the recording of your own voice, which almost everyone universally hates doing. But you have to listen to it objectively, holding the official scoring rubric in your hand. And crucially, you have to track your scores. You need to write them down in a spreadsheet or a journal. Seeing the objective data, seeing your reading score visually climb from an 18 on day 1 to a 24 on day 7 is an incredibly potent source of motivation.
Tracking your metrics provides the empirical evidence that your daily suffering and strategy are actually working. It removes the volatile emotion from the preparation process and replaces it with cold, reassuring data.
Speaking of emotion, you can have the perfect plan, the smartest tactics, and an elite vocabulary. But absolutely none of it matters if you physically and mentally freeze on the morning of the exam. Let's talk about the final and perhaps most critical piece of the puzzle, the mental game. This encompasses exam day logistics and your internal mindset.
The physical and psychological state you are in when you finally sit down at that testing computer will dictate your performance just as much, if not more, than your memorized vocabulary level.
Let's start with the morning routine.
Exam morning begins fundamentally with biology. You need sustained, slow-release energy. We are talking about oatmeal, eggs, whole grain toast. Crucially, you must avoid high doses of caffeine.
Really? No extra coffee?
While coffee might make you feel alert, excessive caffeine biologically mimics the physiological symptoms of panic rapid heart rate, shallow breathing, jitteriness. Your brain registers these physical symptoms and can actually be tricked into feeling genuine, debilitating panic simply because you drank too much espresso.
That is wild. The roadmap also emphasizes logistics. Arrive at the test center at least 30 minutes early to avoid the cortisol spike of rushing. Bring foam earplugs to block out the incredibly distracting sound of 30 other anxious people typing furiously on cheap plastic keyboards. But let's talk about the worst-case scenario. Let's talk about what happens when the test starts, you hit a wall, and the panic genuinely sets in. You look at a reading passage about the socioeconomic structures of obscure Mesopotamian agriculture, you realize you don't understand the first paragraph, the timer is ticking, and your mind just goes totally, terrifyingly blank.
When that level of panic hits, your sympathetic nervous system completely takes over, activating the primal fight-or-flight response. Your breathing becomes rapid and shallow, and crucially, oxygen and blood flow are physically diverted away from your prefrontal cortex, the highly evolved, logical language processing center of your brain.
So you literally can't think.
In that moment, you literally become biologically incapable of complex academic thought. You must actively, manually override this biological response to survive the section.
And the roadmap offers a very specific, actionable tool for this exact moment. The 3-second eyes closed, slow breath technique. Walk us through the mechanics of that.
It is remarkably simple but neurobiologically profound. The moment you feel the blankness creeping in, you close your eyes. This immediately shuts out the aggressive visual stimulus of the ticking countdown timer on the screen.
Right.
You take a slow, deliberate, deep breath in through your nose, expanding your diaphragm rather than your chest, and you exhale incredibly slowly through your mouth. This specific physical action stimulates the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve.
Yes. The vagus nerve essentially acts as a brake pedal for your nervous system. It sends a powerful chemical signal directly to your brain that you are safe, physically lowering your heart rate and forcing blood flow back into your prefrontal cognitive centers. It takes merely 3 seconds to execute, but it can literally save your entire exam from total collapse.
It is a biological reset button. But managing the mental game goes beyond just handling acute panic in the moment. It's about sustaining your overall motivation through the brutal 2-week grind. The strategy explicitly mentions that progress is almost never linear and that consistency beats intensity every single time.
This is a vital realization to internalize for the next 14 days. You will inevitably have days where everything clicks and you feel brilliant, and you will have dark days where you feel like you have somehow forgotten every single word of English you ever learned.
That's completely normal.
That extreme variability is completely normal. It is the natural, messy rhythm of neural adaptation. Consistency studying with extreme focus for 45 minutes every single day builds deep, durable neural pathways. Binge studying for 6 panicked hours on Sunday and then doing absolutely nothing until Wednesday is highly inefficient and biologically confusing to your brain.
And then we get to the very end of the journey, the final 48 hours. The strategy recommends utilizing specific visualization techniques, noting that these are the exact same methods used by Olympic athletes before a race and professional musicians before a concert. Now, I have to be honest, visualization often feels a bit, mystical to people. Does sitting in my quiet bedroom, simply imagining a computer screen, genuinely translate to a higher objective score on a language test?
It absolutely sounds mystical on the surface, but it is deeply grounded in hard neurology. When you vividly, specifically visualize performing an action, your brain actually activates the exact same mirror neuron networks as when you physically perform the action in reality.
That's incredible.
You are systematically familiarizing your central nervous system with the stress of the impending environment. If you take the time to visualize walking into that sterile test center, sitting down in that uncomfortable chair, encountering a brutally difficult, fast-paced listening passage, and instead of spiraling into panic, you imagine yourself taking that deep vagus nerve breath, relying on your active structural note-taking, and confidently pushing through, you're pre-programming your brain's response to adversity.
You're essentially creating a memory of a success that hasn't even happened yet. So when the adversity inevitably strikes during the real exam, your brain doesn't panic. It says, oh, we've been in this exact situation before. We already know the protocol for how to handle this. Think about the massive intellectual and psychological journey you've taken from day 1 to day 14. You started by blindly taking a diagnostic test, likely feeling overwhelmed and inadequate. But by day 14, you have a systematically mapped out reading strategy, you have structural abbreviations for listening notes, you have fully automated speaking templates, and you wield a targeted toolkit of academic verbs.
You have fundamentally transitioned your identity. You have evolved from a reactive student who is merely hoping to get an easy version of the test into a highly proactive, tactical test taker who knows exactly how to deconstruct and conquer whatever complex material the exam throws at them. You've ruthlessly isolated your weaknesses, you've fiercely protected your neurological sleep cycles, and you've systematically rehearsed for peak performance.
Which brings us beautifully back to exactly where we started. We've taken 14 days of potential panic, chaos, and self-sabotage, and we have transformed them into a meticulous, scientifically structured blueprint focused entirely on performance, not an impossible standard of perfection. Just like that professional violinist stepping out onto the brightly lit stage, you aren't trying to invent brand new music under the intense pressure of the spotlight. You are simply executing the rehearsal. You are confidently playing the notes you have so meticulously practiced. If this deep dive helped you, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Learn English Lab YT. The link is in the description below. Every week, they release new content to help you improve your English and reach your academic and professional goals. And I want to leave you with this final, broader thought. Think deeply about what you're actually doing over these next 14 days. You aren't just hacking a standardized test to get a piece of paper. By forcing yourself to learn how to actively skim dense academic information, how to rapidly extract key structural arguments, and how to logically synthesize opposing viewpoints under immense time pressure, you are actually building the exact cognitive toolkit you will rely on every single day to thrive in a demanding university lecture hall or a competitive corporate boardroom. The TOEFL isn't just an annoying obstacle in your path, it is your first true masterclass in high-level, high-stakes communication. The concert is about to begin. Good luck out there.